mortality, longevity, generativity, capacity. And I think that at the heart of this idea is really this notion that, never before have we had so many people who have the insight and experience you get from having reached a certain point, and the capacity to do something with it, and the time to do something with it, the numbers to do something with it. When you put all those things together, maybe you come up with something that's resembling an abundancy ratio. And I think you might also produce a generativity revolution. A lot of people have worried about the state we're leaving this world in for future generations. Erickson, who coined the generativity notion himself, did this interview with Daniel Goleman shortly before he died. And he talked about how fearful he was about the state of the environment and the state of the world that we were passing on, and how much we needed to bring back generativity as an essential value. That's really the human project. Super longevity, folly aside, we're a species that dies and that needs to pass on to future generations what's valuable. That's always been the American project, right? That's the immigrant dream. That's Catalina Tapia's dream, that we're going to leave the world better for our children and for our children's children. And we've lost that track. And I think in creating this stage, building it around these values, we could change the culture as well as produce a windfall of talent. And I think really get the country back on track. And that brings me back to G. Stanley Hall. When he coined adolescence in 1904, when he wrote about that period, he was profoundly romantic about it. Some of the historians who've written about it is that they said that, Hall thought adolescence was going to take place in Valhalla, when in fact it actually took place in high school. And so there's some danger in committing the same mistake. But, we were a young nation in 1904. We were all about youth. In creating this stage and in building out youth to be a beautiful thing, we were really trying to create a vision of America, a dream for America that was also going to be beautiful. Well, we're not a young nation anymore, and it's time for us to give up the addiction to youth. Rather than trying to be younger than we are, what we really need to be is to embrace our age, our stage, and to be there for the people who actually are young. And I think one of the best ways we can do that is through creating this period. Look, we hear that this big change is about aging, it's about retirement revised, it's about the boomers. I don't think it's about any of those things. So I don't even think we'll get to fully inhabit this period. We're the ones who have to do all the heavy lifting. It's about passing on a new picture of life that future generations will come to inhabit, and that itself will be our greatest legacy. And the great thing is, in the past we used to have to be content with leaving a legacy, and now I think we can actually live one. So with that, I'll stop talking and say happy to entertain any questions and then pass them on to Jan to answer. So, thank you. I know we're running a little late. I don't know if there's time for questions. Oh, okay.
Marc, thank you very much for the 24-plus ideas that you presented us tonight. What I would really love for somebody who can't handle 24 ideas in one little period is if you only had one really impactful subject to relate to us, what would that one subject be?
I'd say it's that we need, and this is a homage to Peter Laslett, who wrote this great book, A Fresh Map of Life, in 1989. We need a new map of life, that we're essentially operating with one that was created for much shorter lifespans. And so, that's where you get these ridiculous notions of 30-year retirements. There's this Allstate ad last year that said, a generation that never trusted anyone over 30, never planned on 30 years of retirement, and then implores people to save for 30 years of retirement. And, I don't know about you. I'm 52 years old. I got 3 kids under 5. I don't think I'm going to be retired for 30 years unless there's a true longevity revolution that hits sometimes soon. So I think we need to take a step back and develop a life course that makes sense in the context not only of how long we're living, but how long our children are going to be living. And, of course, there's huge disparities along economic lines, racial lines, educational lines around longevity. And so, you know, that needs to be taken into account. But we need to be thinking about, first of all, how we, you know, democratize the longevity revolution, and second, about how we create a life course that really is a 21st century model.
Marc, my name is Connie Corley. Thank you for a very invigorating talk, especially this time of day for some of us who've been here since early in the morning. But I have a question for you, because you're talking about how we need to create sort of a new sense about aging that has a different scenario than what we're hearing from these magazines and so on. And, you know, with this boomer movement into aging, as we consider it to be 65 and older starting in January, there's also a lot of boomer bashing. And I think a lot of boomers are also, like, don't want to be called seniors and so on and so forth. So if you've got this huge demographic population now moving into this time frame that you're talking about, do you have any suggestions or strategies for mobilizing a more positive energy around this time of life?
Mm-hmm. Well, I really agree that this is not a boomer phenomenon. I mean, as it's often portrayed, boomers are, you know, it's like another boomer phenomenon of, you know, the transformed role of women. I mean, the boomer women were the first in to, you know, to make that change, but it was certainly something that was, you know, extended far beyond our own lives, and has a huge impact on all the people. So I think the boomers are just the first through this change. That said, what an opportunity, and which is why I think that this conference is so important. I mean, this is really only going to happen if we develop a social movement around it. And I think it's starting in pockets like the Positive Aging Conference, in this summit we have for the Purpose Prize. I just detect a similar spirit. If we can weave all that together, we can pull something off that's going to really, you know, have benefits that extend far beyond what we do. I guess with that, I'll close. But I'll just tell you one anecdote, which is what kind of got me going on this whole notion, is this idea that this period in life has become the oxymoronic years, right? You know, the young old, the working retired, the walking dead. And I got exposed to this. I tried to take a sabbatical because I was really exhausted about 2 years ago. And now I wrote this book, and I'm twice as exhausted as I was before I thought I needed to take a sabbatical. And I bought these plane tickets to Australia, and then it turns out there's all this social science research, including some new research coming out in the Journal of Consumer Science. And it shows that one of the greatest joys in life is canceling a vacation, you know, is making all these great plans, you know, basking in them, and then bailing at the last minute and having all this free time. And so I bailed at the last minute because I couldn't imagine spending, you know, months in a hotel room in Sydney or something like that, and it cost me $1,000 to not go to Australia, which seemed fine, but we took a 1-week car trip to Portland, and we couldn't even make it to Portland, and so I called up the Homewood Suites in Medford, Oregon, to try to make reservations, but because I was already out $1,000 on this trip I didn't get to take, I decided to try to get my best discount, which turned out to be the AARP discount. So I was talking to this, you know, 19-year-old, you know, desk clerk, and he gives me the AARP discount. I'm all happy. And then my wife reminds me about the 2 cribs, because we got these 2 kids at that point. Under 3. Now we got 3 kids who are under 5. So I got to call the same 19-year-old back and say, I would like 2 cribs in the room, please. He said, you're the guy with the AARP discount? You know, and I could hear the fraud alerts going off in the background. I felt like the whole class, you know, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. and the whole cast of the FBI were going to be waiting for me with a giant net. Of course, he took one look at me and, you know, gave me the discount. He just assumed I had abducted the kids or something. So this whole idea of an AARP discount and 2 cribs, you know, just kind of drove home the oxymoronic nature of what a lot of us are facing. Have a good night. Thank you.
The Institute for Social Innovation at Fielding Graduate University thanks Marc Freedman for his contribution to the 4th Annual International Conference of Positive Aging. This has been a presentation from the 4th Annual International Conference on Positive Aging, held in Los Angeles at the California Endowment Center for Nonprofit Management. The conference was hosted by the Institute for Social Innovation at Fielding Graduate University in Santa Barbara, California.